So you're like,
I looked over and he looked at me and I looked at you. Mostly his face.
I think that's a good idea. It's just gonna get home. Tonight, we begin an experiment. For our next 2 worship services, we will be preaching a duet, attempting to address an enormously complicated subject: masculinity, femininity, and our faith. We live in a cage, a power structure based on a gender binary, and we are beginning to realize that the cage is not so much a dichotomy as we have long assumed.
We will attempt to climb this mountain, to start a discussion few in the church or even outside of it are willing to address seriously. We will get lost, we will fall, we will scrape our knees and drop things precious to us, and for this we are sorry. But we will begin the conversation. We will strive to have compassion for voices other than our own, even if we do not understand what is being said. For we are a community of faith based in the redeeming love of Jesus the Christ. And with that, let our journey begin.
I'm 8. I love my 3rd grade teacher. She's so cool. We're learning U.S. history right now. The war. Abraham Lincoln is really, really cool. And next we're going to learn about this guy called Martin Luther King Jr. Are there kings in the United States?
Founding fathers. A man who saved the Union. Men changed this country. Men changed this world.
Huh. Where are the girls?
There aren't any. They're really not important.
Ow.
That's great.
I'm 13, and I'm scared. One of my older sisters just told me about sex. The first time anyone's ever talked to me about sex. And she told me about how boys rape girls. How could someone do that? I thought I could trust my guys.
You should be scared, you know. You never forget this, that every boy or man you ever trust or care about, they can destroy you. They have power over you. You will know this in your fiber and every fiber of your being every day for the rest of your life.
But I'm not weak. I might be awkward and pimply and hormonal. And maybe I don't fit in with the other girls, but
You look like a boy! You're ugly. Don't forget your place.
I'm not here for you to look at.
You're a girl, and you're here for men to look at whether you like it or not. You keep your head down and let the men figure things out. The only power you have is your inferior sexuality, but only heterosexuality. Maybe your ability to cook. So go make me a sandwich.
I'm 16. No, I'm 21. And I'm angry. I'm not meat, and I'm not property. So stop looking at me like that. Don't touch me.
You're small, you're quiet. No one cares about what you want in life because men are just going to take it from you. Get there first. We beat you up. Get too uppity, honey, and you could get hurt.
Shut up! I may be small on the outside, but I am a juggernaut inside. So don't talk to me like that. Let's talk about you.
I'm 7. Somebody called me a mean name at school and I cried in the bathroom.
Boys don't cry. Don't be weak.
But it hurt my feelings.
Boys don't have feelings. Boys play sports and grunt and beat each other up. So stop crying, weakling.
I'm 15. I'm not really big on sports. I do speech. The football players shove me into the lockers in front of the girl that I really like.
Girls don't like guys that aren't big and strong. Who are you to think anyone wants to be with you?
I'm 24. I have this girlfriend. We're thinking about getting married. I haven't had sex with her yet.
Why? Just sleep with her. You don't want to make a lifelong commitment here. Why do you think people are less happy after they get married? If it doesn't work out, there's always another girl.
Leave me alone!
Do we see the problem here? Patriarchy. Sexism. This is a hierarchy that gives primary authority and privilege to the male and the masculine in all aspects of community and society, from politics to morality to economics to language. And by definition, this requires the oppression, suppression, submission of what is seen to be opposite to masculine, that is, the female and the feminine. Sounds like idolatry to me to bow down to any master besides God herself.
And don't tell me it's not real. Don't tell me it's no big deal. Because I've seen too many boys emotionally beat to bits by their fathers and brothers and mothers and sisters. I've known too many girls and boys attacked by somebody who's more proud of their penis than their brain.
I've heard too many men told that the feminine is weak, so often that they actually believe it. I've heard secrets and seen patterns so delicate and subtle and manipulative that even the most liberal-minded man is blind to how little his actions match his words when it comes to treating both sexes fairly.
I'm in a field where my power is based upon my sex more than on my ability, where my privilege is a weight I never asked for, yet causes harm no matter what I do.
I am going into a field where an ordained sister has been harassed, a man grabbing her by the very collar that declares, "I am here to help, thanks be to God," and taken the beating of his supposed superiority, in which a pregnant minister was asked not to perform communion in her church because her sacred state made her too powerful.
Don't look at me like we aren't swimming in this radioactive soup of sexism. You know, sexism in our culture today gives us the rules. These rules state that if society labels you as woman, you must be perfect. You must be perfectly groomed, perfectly sexy, perfectly domestic, perfectly modest, perfectly mothering, perfectly emotionally balanced. And don't you dare be powerful. If you are perfect, then maybe, just maybe, you could be considered to be almost as good as a man. But then, look at how we treat Hillary Clinton.
These rules state that if society labels you as man, you must be strong, no feelings, no kindness, no fear, no vulnerability, only power. Because to be a man is to be in control, to be powerful, to put women in their place. And from rape culture to healthcare, to equal pay, well, lack thereof, to political representation, to comic books. That is exactly what we're doing.
See, here's the problem. The roles we are told to play in a sexist society are actually false hopes. They are idols we're told to emulate. But idols can never fulfill us.
The work of Brené Brown, a shame and vulnerability researcher, points to the fact that living into the roles of sexism lead to an unbearable state of being. Women are exhausted, she writes. They are beginning to clearly see that the expectations are impossible. Pursuing those expectations will not earn us fulfillment in absence of equality.
Meanwhile, men feel increasingly disconnected, and the fear of failure becomes paralyzing. Nonetheless, we together continue to insist that masculine is better than feminine. We continue to insist that once assigned a sex at birth, your entire destiny is written.
But we've got news for you. We are Christ followers. And that Christ we follow was not about sexism. That Christ we follow was not about this person is better than that person.
That said, Jesus might have been about saying this person is equal to that person. And that can rile just a few people up.
Just look at our scriptures. Look at the Gospels. In particular, let's look at the story of Mary called Magdalene. Now, some of you might have heard that she was a prostitute, and while Jesus certainly ministered to prostitutes, the scriptures don't say that Mary is one, although she had her demons. No, she and other women with her traveled with Jesus and the disciples in ministry, providing for them out of their resources.
Now here's a question to consider. Since when did women in ancient Israel have resources? Since when did women 2,000 years ago have the right to travel at all? Or with men that weren't their husbands?
Israel was no egalitarian society when it came to the sexes. Women were shamed and controlled, having little ability to move about freely, much less possess resources to contribute to a religious movement. Jesus did something incredibly radical by including women in his ministry team. And if you're not convinced, in the story of Mary and Martha, we hear Jesus calling Martha, the dutiful sister tending to the domestic needs of her family and guests, to join Mary in listening to his message, bringing her into the ministry instead of letting the dominant culture's expectations rule the day. The apostles, too, did something remarkable in following the footsteps of someone who so challenged the sexist assumptions of their society. But most especially, these women themselves called to question the patriarchy of ancient Israel. In fact, Mary called Magdalene was the first to preach the good news, the resurrection of the once dead Messiah. It is in her footsteps every disciple in Christianity's history walks, including us. She who was an outcast, a woman controlled by society, broke free of those chains and did a most powerful thing. And she was the first of many women to lead in the early community.
Women were fully involved among the followers of the way, the early Christian movement. Understanding the Greek was using in early Christian writings, even in the writings of Paul and in Hellenistic context in the early community, scholars can now recognize that before even Paul, women across the Mediterranean were missionaries, hosts of house churches, prophets, and on equal standing with Christian men.
While the English translations of our sacred texts often communicate otherwise, the original Greek challenged androcentrism, that is, the way a culture and language can perpetuate sexism. Greek words that describe men as missionaries and co-workers to Paul are also used to describe women in the same letters. However, the terms are often translated differently into English, without much consideration to scholarship about the actual environments of these early churches.
We read our own standards onto our predecessors to justify our own sexism, both that which is explicit and subtle. As the church becomes increasingly institutionalized, however, it began to be more closely resemblant of the overriding culture in which it existed. It justified patriarchy with the language of romantic love and domesticity. In turn, the church resembled the radically inclusive ministry of our Christ less and less. Women's liberation in that religious movement was beginning to attract threats from the powers that be, and that's how it started.
It started with women being told to act within the culture's limits, so as to protect the religious movement from persecution, to protect Christian survival.
But repeat a lie enough, and it begins to sound like truth.
The oppression of women has existed outside of Christianity, of course. According to Peter Stearns, women in pre-agricultural societies held equal positions with men. It was only after the adoption of agriculture and sedentary cultures that men began to institutionalize the concept that women were inferior to men. That institution was very well established by the time Jesus showed up on the block. And women within the way had such a relatively short experience of equality. Within about 300 years, the amount of time it took for Christianity to go from persecuted radicals to the empirical standard, women were once again marginalized and treated as less than human.
Within Methodism specifically, the historical record on how women are treated is a little fuzzy. Well, really, suffice it to say, it's rarely been much of an improvement to our culture surrounding a local church's location, even though women have felt a call to ministry since the early days of the Methodist movement in England. In fact, it wasn't until 1956 that women won the acknowledgement of their right to be clergy in our denomination. Nowadays, there are thousands of women fully involved in all levels of the church, from committee chairs at the local church to pastors, to administration, to bishops. That said, like many contexts today, it's not a 50% deal. Compared to the thousands of years of subjugation the feminine has experienced in ancient and Western cultures, this current movement for equality is barely a blip in human history. A radical thing, really.
Here's the thing. Freedom fighters have discovered time and time again that the oppressor in any system of power is also oppressed by their own power system. Shame, study shows, is highly correlated with addiction, violence, aggression, depression, eating disorders, and bullying. The only way to combat shame, however, is by practicing authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy, the necessities of what Brown calls a wholehearted life, which, of course, is really difficult, especially for men living in a world that beats the tar out of them for even admitting they have feelings or weaknesses or struggles. And of course, living authentically, vulnerably, and empathetically emulates the life of Jesus. Go figure. Basically, for as long as women have been oppressed by the hierarchy of sexes, putting them in their place, so have men been oppressed by the very system that prioritizes their power. A friend of ours posted on Facebook earlier this week, and with apologies to Audrey Crumbach, we are stealing it because her timing was just perfect. Patriarchy's biggest lie is that in order for one to be strong, the other must be weak. Feminism scares the hierarchy because feminism suggests that the strength of women might encourage men also to be strong and self-defined. Or some men might claim another image, or they might claim peacemaking skills. But the gendered expectations will be exploded so men can be anything.
If little girls can grow up to be prime ministers and astronauts and welders, so can boys. If girls can grow up to be teachers and nurses and fashion designers, so can boys. And by God, let it be.
Our God calls us to challenge this status quo. Jesus the Christ's radical call for inclusion, hospitality, and true love based on equality and respect. That's what we follow. It's not easy. There are a lot of idols out there, and our society is incredibly talented at manipulating us with anything from ads to misperceptions to skewed facts to subtle patterns of behavior.
But why settle for anything less? Amen.
Amen.